Yeah, this is just a little talk, a remark, so to speak, on one of the many very valuable and good videos of a very nice coach and mentor and therapist, in a way, and a teacher on the internet called Richard Grannon. Richard Grannon is very nice, one of the few mentors and teachers and therapists, so to speak, online that I really like. And he's authentic and down to earth and has a very sobering perspective on things. And his, you could say, his main focus is trauma, healing from trauma, both personal trauma, PTSD, and especially perhaps complex PTSD, but also intergenerational trauma. And in his funny and good and entertaining videos and talks with Sam Vaknin, an academic who is also enlightened and experienced and knowledgeable when it comes to narcissism, and he has been also very transparent and very helpful when it comes to understanding more of the aspects, not only that characterizes narcissism, but of course those that leads to narcissism, that which might constitute narcissistic behavior or personality traits. I mean that which might lead to, that which might be the cause for it, and of course the behavior in itself, how we can characterize it and see it for what it is, so that we can better learn to see ourselves, because we all have narcissistic traits and tendencies, and also mostly how we could be more able to protect ourselves from narcissistic abuse, because that is something that happens in every person's life. We all encounter narcissistic abuse in smaller degree or greater degree. And we all have trauma. We all have intergenerational trauma in our history, in our body history, in our nervous system, brain history. And we also, all of us have trauma, psychological, emotional trauma from adverse childhood experiences, from difficult childhood experiences, and from trauma during childhood and upbringing. That's, I mean, that's where we come from, you know. That's the root of the tree that we have become today, so to speak. I mean, trauma is an incredibly important part of our life, even though we don't see it. And some of us, many of us, suppress it, and we don't even know that we have it. We actually think that we don't have it. And when we suddenly learn techniques or ways to open up for it, then we are suddenly perhaps flooded or surprised by, holy mama, this was a real deal. I mean, this is something that has been pressing and pushing on my nervous system and my brain and my mind organism, so to speak, for many years, and this has been the reason for my discomfort. I didn't know that I actually suffered from a trauma, that I had a real traumatic knot inside my brain and nervous system. That's quite normal. Many people experience that. And we all have trauma in some way or another, to some degree or another. So, and it all affects our behavior, and it all leads to the creation of certain neurocircuitry in our brain, because our behavioral patterns come from the neurocircuitry in our brains, some of which are just there. They are part of the human program, which I have explained many times. They're just a part of the human program, and some of them are those that we have downloaded ourselves by repeating certain emotional reactions to triggers, to that which triggers, and this also carves out neurocircuitry in our brain, by which we also even re-traumatize ourselves after the trauma has been survived. So trauma and neurocircuitry in the brain and mind-brain behavior and the experience of ourselves, the knowledge of ourselves, all of this is extremely interesting, and there are many aspects that come into it, from the subtle vibrational points that may exist in the neurons that have been affected by intergenerational trauma, to blah 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 in everyday life, and accidents and trauma and emotional abuse and neglect and abandonment, betrayal, everything that really hurts us deeply and that can be devastating for us. And many people are truly devastated by trauma. They are walking war zones, they are suffering on two legs because they really truly suffer from trauma were devastated by trauma and are still living in the aftermath of trauma in some form or another. And this little talk is especially about that, about suffering, because in one of Richard Grannon's talks, where he's talking about intergenerational trauma, he comes into Indian philosophy, which of course is very, very, very relevant to talk about, and especially the discourse of the discernment between true self and false self, and the Atman and Brahman and things like that are very relevant to this. But he comes into Buddhism. And I'm doing this talk because of what he says about Buddhism, because that is actually just completely wrong. And most of the world, 90% of the world population who are not Buddhist or who doesn't know or understand Buddhism, they usually think in the way that Richard Grannon thinks, because of bad translations, because of books that have been badly translated. But of course there's also a question of interpretation here, so we cannot say that someone are really at fault and someone are truly right. But the thing that I can say is something that is very interesting when it comes to Buddhism, to understanding it correctly. At least the way that I see it, and many professional Buddhists, so to speak, would agree with that. Because in this talk, Richard Grannon is talking about how can we reduce our suffering, right? And in order to do this, we also have to start to think about ancient spiritual disciplines that might have valuable information. He doesn't say this, but that's the interpretation of what he's doing in that talk. And then he comes to Buddhism as a result of that. And he is talking about the Four Noble Truths. And he says that according to an English translation, the first noble truth is that the world is suffering. All life is suffering. All the world is suffering. All life is suffering. And this is a horribly mistaken translation. It's very wrong. And many people believe in this. They think that Buddhism, oh yes, that's it. That they say that everything is suffering, right? And you have to get out of it to get to nirvana, right? And you just have to become a Buddha, and then you're in nirvana, and then you're out of the samsara that creates suffering. Yeah, that's the cartoon image, or the cartoonish understanding of Buddhism, but it's not correct, it's not right. So let me just say straight, what are the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism? Because many people think that the first noble truth of Buddhism is that life is suffering, the world is suffering, everything in life is suffering, there's suffering everywhere. The world means suffering. But that is not the first noble truth. The first noble truth says something very, very different, analytically and phenomenologically. And Buddhism is a science, so people have to understand this. True Buddhism is a science, it's not a religion. It's a true science for understanding the human program, so to speak. It's a true science for understanding how the human brain and the human mind works. So the first noble truth is suffering exists. There is something in this world which is suffering. That's the first noble truth. The first noble truth is not the world is suffering, life is suffering, all life is suffering. No, it is not. The first noble truth is like this. suffering exists, which means there is something in this world which is suffering. There exists suffering in this world. The second noble truth is suffering has a cause. There's something that is the reason for suffering. There's a cause for suffering, and this reason is desire. Or we could even say attachment to desire, which probably would be even more correct. The reason for suffering is attachment to desire. That would probably be more precise and correct when it comes to the actual essential teachings, but there are of course many different opinions, and it comes from the original Pali literature, Pali text, but there are many also Sanskrit translations or Sanskrit versions, so that there's a certain dichotomy, so to speak, between Pali and Sanskrit, and then there's all the translations into English and other languages, and then also interpretations, which results in new translations and blah blah blah. So it's an endless hoo-babaloo, But the truth is this: to say that the first noble truth of Buddhism is the world is suffering, everything is suffering, life is suffering, is actually wrong, because then Buddhism actually wouldn't make sense, because Buddhism is about to find the remedy for suffering. So it doesn't make sense to say that life is suffering, the world is suffering. It doesn't really make sense from a Buddhist perspective, because then if that was the case, if that is true, then Buddhism doesn't make sense, because then you can't get out of it. Then you cannot get out of suffering. Then you have to kill yourself, or then you would have to end life in order to get out of suffering. And that's not what Buddhism says. Buddhism, or the Buddha, or the first noble truth of Buddhism, says suffering exists. There is something in this world that is suffering. The second noble truth is suffering has a cause. There is something that is producing this suffering. There is a reason why suffering exists. And this reason is desire, or perhaps even more precisely, our attachment to desire. And the third noble truth is there's a way to reduce suffering. The way to reduce suffering is to let go of desire, or to disconnect from our attachment to desire. We have to learn something about ourselves. If we learn something about ourselves, how we relate to our own desires, then we can reduce suffering. This is the third noble truth. The fourth noble truth is the way to liberate ourselves from that which produces suffering is the Eightfold Path. And this is the true model, the true system of Buddhism, the Four Noble Truths. Suffering exists. There is something in this world that is suffering. Suffering has a cause. There's something that results in suffering. There's something that is producing that which is suffering. That which is producing that which is suffering is our own attachment to desire. The way to reduce our suffering is to dissolve, or to minimize, or to understand our own relationship to desire, is to give up desire, to say it in the quick way. The third noble truth is to let go of desire. You don't have to let go of the world, you just let go of desire, right? But in essence, it is like this, that in order to minimize suffering, or to reduce it, or to be free from suffering, you have to let go of desire. Number fourth, the way forward in this process is to follow the Eightfold Path. That's what the model of Buddhism is. It is not that all life is suffering, the world is suffering. We cannot escape it. Buddhism is that there is something in this world that is suffering, and you will suffer if you attach to your own desire. Then you will suffer. The way to reduce, or to be free from suffering, is to let go of your own attachment to desire. to let go of your own connection to that which is desire. I am extrapolating, I'm giving more clarity to the Four Noble Truths, or I'm making them as clear as I can. They are a little bit more short and say that, suffering exists. There's a reason for suffering. Desire is the cause of suffering. In order to let go of suffering, or in order to be free of suffering, you have to let go of desire. To let go of desire is something that can be best achieved through the Eightfold Path. You could also say something like that. But you understood my point, and my previous explanation was the best one. If I say it out like this, it will be better for people to understand. Suffering exists. There is something in this world that is suffering. Sometimes we suffer. Sometimes there is something that is suffering in our lives. Sometimes there is suffering in the world. Suffering is something that exists. That's the first noble truth. Second noble truth is suffering has a cause. There's a reason why we suffer. There's a reason why we suffer, and the reason why we suffer is desire. I'm giving a little bit extra and saying that the reason why we suffer is because of our mental attachment to desire, to that which we desire, or to the content of our desires. We attach to the content of that which we desire. Hence, we suffer. So, there's a reason for suffering, and the reason is our own attachment to desire, or our own belief in the validity of following our own desires. It's the donkey after the carrot, right? Okay. So, and number 3, in order to let go of suffering, in order to be free from suffering, you have to give up desire. Or you have to give up your own attachment to it. You have to stop following the carrot around. You have to stop chasing the carrot, because the carrot is just a carrot, and it's always going to be 1 foot in front of your nose, in front of your eyes. You're always going to chase it, whether it's $1 million or $1 billion or a new wife or a yacht or food for lunch or whatever it is. There's always something that we are chasing. Success, fame, death, non-existence. This is something that is very interesting in Buddhism when it comes to this desire, because and this is why Buddhism is a science. It's a strict science. It's not only a religion, it's a real science. Because people think that you can only have desire for that which exists. But there are 3 main objects of desire, or there are 3 main things that we do actually desire. We have desire for existence. We have a desire for ourself. We have desire for our own beingness. We have desire for the world as such. We have desire for existence. But we also have desire for non-existence. We have desire for dissolution, for annihilation. We have desire for nirvana. We have desire for that which is free of the world, which is free from life. We have desire for death, for freedom from life. We have desire for non-existence. And then we also, of course, have desire for that which gives pleasure. We have desire for pleasurable things. But the interesting thing is that to see that we don't only have desire for things that exists for us, that we want. We also have desire for the absence of things. We not only have desire for existence and for life and for our own self, we also have desire for the dissolution of our own self. We also have desire for non-existence and for non-being. Excuse me. Yes, but so anyway, the 4 noble truths of Buddhism is like this. Suffering exists. There's a reason for suffering. The reason for suffering is attachment to desire, following the desire, believing in desire, having the desire. the way to minimize or to reduce or to be free from suffering is to let go of desire, to let go of your own attachment to desire. And because this is very difficult, we need an eightfold path to help us on that road. And that's the noble truth number 4, that the way to achieve the cessation of desire, the way to achieve the cessation of suffering, is the eightfold path. I would like to say that excuse me, I don't consider Buddhism to be the best model. I don't really think that Buddhism is the best model for life, and I don't think it is the ultimate truth in my life, at least. I mean, my model is different than Buddhism. My life model is different than Buddhism, but it's very close, because my model is perhaps even more Vedic. It is more like Advaita Vedanta style in a way. It's and not even that either. I think I'm a mix of Western, the best of Western psychology and Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta. Yeah, because it's really relevant to think like that. And there are many good reasons for that, because both scientifically and of course psychologically, and psychologically means also scientifically, because psychology is after all the science of the mind. But anyway, so this is important, and even though Buddhism perhaps is not the ultimate thing, it can still give us tremendous insight into everything, because it is a very sophisticated science of the mind and of the human situation. So it's very sophisticated, it's very deep, and it should be treated with respect, and it should be understood correctly. So this is the reason why I come with this little talk, because I want to give some correction, some modification to the normal perception of Buddhism that life is suffering. And Richard Grannon unfortunately has a bad translation of his Buddha Dharma, so he reads that all life is suffering, or the world is suffering. But he knows, because he's clever, he has studied some of the other translations or the more ancient interpretations, and he says that, but I see that this translation may not be the correct one, that it's more nuanced than that, and to say that we suffer because we are sentient beings. Sentient beings suffer, which of course is very true, because consciousness, the experience of consciousness, is actually giving us suffering, because it's a pressure there. We experience the pressure of our own brain-mind system. We experience having a consciousness. And the experience of having a consciousness in and of itself results also in suffering at times, when we are overwhelmed, when the brain is overwhelmed, when we come from trauma, when we come from difficult life experiences, when we have physical pain, mental pain, emotional pain, psychological pain. Consciousness in and of itself also constitutes a certain kind of pressure that we might feel uncomfortable. So to get out of suffering, I think, is probably an irrelevant question. Suffering, we just have to accept it. Suffering exists, it's here. And it's not true, as Buddhism says, that suffering exists because of desire. I don't think that's true. I think it's because of the human program. The human program produces suffering. So I don't think that the Buddha is correct, and I don't think that Buddhism is correct. Either one of the translations are not the complete ultimate solution, but the true translation, which is that suffering exists, suffering is something that exists and it has a reason, is of course the best way to see Buddhism, because that's the right way to see Buddhism as I see it. And to talk about this would be very interesting, because we have to find a model that would satisfy us more and Buddhism cannot satisfy me, but it has been an eye-opener. It has been the door into spirituality and into introspection and into understanding the world, into 10 times deeper philosophical research and practice than the so-called Western school of thought, because the Western philosophy, a Western school of thought, is like a kindergarten sometimes, even if it is Derrida, No, I'm sorry, making a joke about you, my dear little Jacques. Sorry to say it like this, but many Western philosophers are small freaks in the big game of things, because true philosophy has to be done by real people and not by people who are lacking in self-insight and lacking in education. And most of the French philosophers are lacking in self-insight and they are lacking in education. The reason why they are so successful and so famous is simply because they're so arrogant. They're the same like Americans, They consist of 90% arrogance and 10%... No, they consist of 90% arrogance, 8% ignorance, and 2% knowledge and competence. Well, that was a sweet thing, wasn't it, to say it, to have given a diagnosis on Western thought. No, Plato, Schopenhauer, and Kant. That's what you need in Western philosophy. Schopenhauer, Plato, and Kant. To some extent also Wittgenstein. And of course others as well. But yes, we need more maturity, more self-insight, more clarity, more transparency in this dialogue, because it's perhaps the most important topic of all. How do we find the right model for life? How do we find the right model that explains our life situations, and which also gives us the right path to follow mentally and spiritually and psychologically when it comes to what should we believe in, what should we believe in, what should we regard as essential or true, or what should we regard as true knowledge. And in that case, Buddhism has a very strong hand, because, as I say, Buddhism is an analytical, phenomenological, scientific approach to that which is life. And it is cutting through the cake with a very elegant knife. And when you're able to use the tools that true Buddhism gives you, you can go through this life successfully, and even without real suffering. If you really take it seriously, Buddhism can be a perfect methodology to follow, really and truly. Personally, I think that it's not the right when it comes to the soul, heart, essence, and the true self, and the ultimate absolute reality, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I'm probably a little bit more into the Zen version of Buddhism than the actual Buddhist dogma, so to speak, and the teachings. But anyway, this was something for those that are interested in things, and most of all thanks also to Richard Grannon, which has delivered a lot of very important videos and a lot of important mentorship and teachings when it comes to trauma and self-insight and how to deal with hardship in this life, and how to protect ourselves against narcissistic abuse, how to protect ourselves against toxic people, how to understand toxicity in people, how to understand trauma that, of course, very often leads to the toxicity, because hurt people hurt people. People that are hurt and damaged will very likely give traumatic impulses or behavior to other people. Narcissists are narcissists simply because they are shielding themselves, they are protecting themselves from an inner truth or from an inner suffering from an inner pressure, psychological and emotional trauma pressure, that they cannot deal with. So they have produced a false self in which they proclaim to be the very special person that they are, which becomes a narcissist because he cannot see other people, and because he lives in this false self as a self-protection mechanism, as a way of protecting himself or herself from the pain in his life or in her life, then he is just putting himself or herself into this false identity self that serves as his avatar or her avatar in this life, so to speak. And everything, phenomenologically speaking, is in some sense an avatar, the coming into being of something that we cannot truly analyze and describe fully. All right, thank you very much for listening. Thanks and bye.